to you.
Okay. It looks as if these began about 5 weeks before the May 24 letter. At least these emails.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So this is the last stages, one assumes, of Mr. Chadawa's plan, because he must have hatched it before then.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. These are the ones we have.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does. That is right. The ones we have go back about 5 weeks before Mr. Chadawa left. Yeah.
And I don't think we believe in coincidences. And if you look at the date of that letter, it's only 2 days later Mr. Chadawa gave his notice. And I feel very confident we're going to find some other.
We should think about whether, since these will, I assume, be discoverable if you have to go to litigation, whether it might make sense to let me use them at the right moment to encourage MedPro to take this more seriously.
Mumbai's representatives alleged that MedPro had taken advantage of the situation, allowing Mumbai to do the groundwork necessary to build a market, then abruptly terminating their contract as the relationship became profitable.
Sounds extraordinarily frustrating. On the one hand, you're dealing with a disloyal employee. That's pretty clear at this point. You're dealing, as I hear, with a lawyer who's basically arguing a wonderful view of the world for MedPro.
I mean, they haven't even decided which part of the contract. I didn't even read the contract, okay? But now I've read it because my lawyers told me I have to read it before this session.
Right.
Okay. Now, they're not even deciding which part of the contract they're terminating the contract. And how can they just oh, we've terminated it. We don't know which part of the deal we've terminated it under, but we've terminated. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Well, I am going to have to ask them more about that.
The mediator listened to the Mumbai CEO describe her understanding of the contract and her expectations about the business relationship. He then turned the discussion toward other potential concerns.
Tell me a little bit about your business plan. That is, this was part of a larger plan for Mumbai Partners.
Yes, it was.
You weren't going to be Mumbai oximeters.
No.
So...
Yeah, I mean, we had an idea, we have been doing business in basically very small potatoes kind of medical supplies, bandages, that sort of thing. So we're interested in expanding into the more high-tech area because this is the expanding area of medical technology. It also allows us to hire more well-trained staff. But that letter they sent us said, okay, you can have a non-exclusive contract now. I mean, that's sort of like, they're not even giving us the machines. What non-exclusive contract? How can we have a contract at all? We don't have any equipment to sell.
Well, they shut us off, so it doesn't speak to the gap that needs to be filled, and that's part of our damages concern. They're not giving us probes right now.
Right. And I gather that the higher end involves a whole level of licensing and acceptance that really doesn't apply to surgical bandages and clamps and that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So we were creating those relationships, and it means dealing with a higher level of the hospital staff, the executive level.
So it sounds like you were expecting to sell the other kinds of equipment in addition to pulse oximeters, other kinds of sophisticated equipment.
Yeah, that was definitely the hope. We were hoping to use the contacts that we built from the oximeters to launch into other products, into radiology equipment, CAT scans, these sorts of expensive types of equipment. I mean, a lot of Americans are actually coming to India to get surgery done.
I've heard about that.
Yeah, so that's actually, so there's a demand now for those kinds of tests to be done.
Would it be the same kind of market entry process that you had to go through for the oximeters?
Yes, pretty much the same. I mean, there are some differences, but basically the contacts that we've built because of the oximeters, there would be very similar process and very similar people that we would deal with.
Well, thank you for your patience in there, and thank you, by the way. I assume that we took longer than whatever I predicted. Okay.
No problem.
My first question, if you can think back to when we were in the room together, is there anything that you maybe wanted to say in there but decided not to? Anything you'd like to say now that you think I should hear?
I can't think of anything right now.
Anything they say surprise you?
Well, the thing that puzzled me, frankly, was the emphasis that Mumbai's counsel placed on this sort of other agreement.
The mediator talked at length with MedPro's lawyer and vice president about the legal issues in the case and MedPro's understanding of the contract. She also asked about the company's business goals, when it began its relationship with Mumbai, and at present. After more than an hour, the discussion turned to bargaining.
It would be helpful to me to have a number to go back with.
Well, here's where I am on that, and we've spoken about this. I'm not sure that I really feel comfortable being the first one in here with a number. I would really like to see a number from them that's framed by the realities we've just been talking about.
Yeah, I mean, they did make a formal demand just prior to the mediation, right, of, I believe, $1.6 million. So I know that if I go back in there without a number for you, they're going to say, well, we said $1.6 million, and then what are they going to say?
Well, normally I would understand and read that as an opening proposal, but it's a number that's so unreasonable in terms of what we've talked about, how we would calculate and measure the damages, even if this were deemed to be breach, which we really don't think they can show, that it's hard for me to treat it as a number that we can respond to. And that's why, as I said, I'm reluctant to be what it feels like to me as being the first one in. That
so you're sort of saying it doesn't count?
Yeah, it's kind of a magical number.
A magical number, yeah, it's a magical number. Of course, to them, the magical number is real. Let me just say two things, okay? One is that I do understand that it doesn't seem real and why respond to a fake number. But if we both do that, we're just never going to get anywhere. I'm going to spend my time, your money and time going back and forth and saying, please, can I have a number? Please, can I have a number? And nobody wants to bid against themselves, and we'll just get nowhere fast. So somebody at some point is going to need to step up to the plate. And I think I'm going to have a lot of trouble getting them to do what they would characterize as bidding against themselves. Do you understand?
Yeah, I certainly see the difficulty of your position.
But let me say something positive along those lines, and that is that there's a fair amount of research out there that tells you that the person that puts, or the party that puts the first serious number on the table actually has a negotiation advantage. That first number out there anchors things. And so the first number is important. And so what I'm going to suggest is give me a first number, but when you formulate it, disregard the 1.6.
Just
Make believe it's not
sense
there.
Of a real first
Yeah,
number.
think about where you think you'll end up, not where you want to end up, but where it might be reasonable for you to end up at the end of the day, all things considered. And then pick a first number that would head you there. And then that's what I would ask you to do.
I think this.
You want to talk about it?
We might need to talk about it.
Okay, that's fine. Well, I knocked on the door and you said you were ready, and do you have a number for me?
Well, we've talked about the frames of reference that you used, and the number that we feel we can put out there, given all of my concerns and reluctances, is 50,000. And I can talk to that if you would like, and sort of explain how we got there, what it signifies.
You gave me a number. I asked you for a number.
I mean, we're going back to this kind of worst case scenario that you worked through with us, which is worst case.
Right.
After they show liability, which we don't think they can show, and a measure of damages that's at the far end of these multiple ways of terminating, gets us to 280. That's the outer limit. And I think if this is a number to get us framed, the number that it needs to be is in that $50,000 range.
Okay. Let me just, I appreciate that $50,000 is not an inconsequential sum of money, especially if actually you had the right to terminate in the 30 days. In which case you would either owe nothing or $20,000 or something like that. Am I right? What do you suspect their response will be?
Who knows?
My problem, right?
I don't think they're going to be thrilled with it, and I think part of what we're struggling with is their expectation of a future business relationship income stream that's just terribly unrealistic.
And you want to send a message that this is not about that. One of the things that worries me a little bit is that they'll hear you're 50 and think, oh no, they'll only ever pay 75 or 90 or something like that. And so I'm worried a little bit that the 50 may send an even lower signal than maybe you would have intended. What do you think about that one?
You know, I'm concerned about it getting up over, and you know, if there's a number or a reference point that you want us to think about, you know, I'm certainly happy to do that.
Let me just say, one of the things that I'm thinking is that if it would be reasonable to settle the case in that 280-ish range, then maybe you would want to start at around 100, which still gives you plenty of room to go up. But, you know, let me just say, and you don't have to do it now, but one of the ideas here is that you want to offer enough so that if they're at all reasonable, which we don't really know yet, but if they are thinking rationally,
That they might come back.
that it gives them enough hope to hang in there. And so that's my concern about the 50, whereas about 100, you know, maybe they would engage a little bit.
Now, I certainly understand what you're saying, and 100 sounds different in perhaps an important way that allows them to have a toehold.
Right, that's what I'm thinking.
And I think we would just need to talk about that. No, you go ahead.
We just feel like we can't go above the 50. They're not operating on real numbers, and we don't want to encourage that.
So you don't want to get into real numbers because they're not. No, listen, I'm not arguing. That makes sense. I get it. Okay. You know, could backlash, could not. Let's see what happens. You're clearly sending a message. But let me just say one thing. It's always nice to have a reason for a number. We used $20,000 a month before to come up with the 14 months.
Sure, the worst case.
Yeah. If I look at the 90-day termination idea, and that's 3 months. If I multiply that by $20,000 a month, I get $60,000. It might be nice for me to be able to keep them tied to the contract, say you're tied to the contract, and come back with 60. Could you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess
Can I do that?
a way of packaging that is to say, you know, it's either immediate termination or an intermediate view is that 90 days. And
Right.
Are you
That
comfortable
makes
with
much more
that
sense,
going up? So that would be going up 10 from what we talked about.
And actually, and I can characterize that as good faith. You know, they could have stuck down with the 30, but they're coming up to what would be 90 days. I'll do that. I'll try that.
Okay, that sounds
Great.
Well, thank you for waiting. It took me a while, but I wanted to go over each of the points you'd raised with MedPro to see what their response was. And also they had, of course, had things that they wanted to say from the first session, and I can tell you a little bit about what their thinking is. I do think they want to get this resolved today. I think there are reasons for both sides not to want to spend a lot of time in, I'll call it American-style litigation. I raised with them your strong belief that Chattaway was essentially encouraged to leave you and betray you by Cho. They pushed back pretty hard. They say that as part of sort of their corporate due diligence, they did a scrub of their computer system and their computer records because they wanted to know what emails Cho had sent. And they say they don't see any emails prior to about the 1st of April, which is about 6-7 weeks before the May 24 letter, in which are more than just, I'll see you for our monthly meeting or something like that. You'll have to see that. Now, that still doesn't mean that there weren't meetings in a bar or a restaurant or wherever, but it does mean he was under some corporate pressure to keep his numbers up. I don't know what would happen if you deposed him, but that's a bit of information.
I appreciate the information. I mean, for candidly, we have to take that with a grain of salt.
Yep.
But I appreciate the receipt of the information and the spirit with which you pass it on to us.
I would say that they're not arguing, they're not drawing a line in the sand and saying we're certain that that May 24 letter terminated the contract. They recognize that there could be some argument about whether there was cause for terminating this contract. They recognize that you may have some pretty strong reasons why, in fact, there wasn't cause, that your performance was acceptable, and that there might have been external reasons. They do say that the contract, as written by MedPro, has sort of a 3-tier termination system, as you know. We at the most would be exposed to 14 months from the July 1 when they tried to terminate of last year until September 1 of this year. So I guess they're analyzing this as damages of somewhere in the little less than 300 to something more than 400 kind of range. And that, I think, is what's driving their thinking. And that's the issue here, as I hear you both, more than really the liability.
Well, what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that they are acknowledging a real theory of cause of action here, some sort of legitimate cause of action, and so they are starting to speculate about what their perspective on damages are. But I'm concerned, and I'm sure my client is as well, that there's no accounting for future losses.
My figure comes from the idea that there's about 5 years of lost profit here, at least. I mean, the other thing is, they knew that we were doing all of this upfront costs, which we expended ourselves.
Right.
And this is upwards of $500,000 US that we've spent on, training, studies, all the things that need to happen in order to create a market in India. And these are things that MedPro could not have done without us. They could not have done it. It's absolutely impossible to just come into the Indian market and do these things.
Let me ask you a question. I assume these are actual out-of-pocket dollars.
Yes.
So I can represent to them that, again, really going the other way, if there were a settlement, maybe subject to appropriate confidentiality, because I know these are private expenditures, could you verify that actually $500,000 or so had been spent in one way or another on the development or marketing of these oximeters?
Well, there's a significant percentage of those expenditures that can be verified with receipts. But they know damn well how the game is played, and they know that there are some expenses, if you will, that generate goodwill when you're trying to dive into a market, especially a foreign market, where those aren't things that lend themselves to receipts.
Okay, fair enough. I think if we could verify a significant percentage of that, they would understand that the rest of the money had to be spent as well.
I have some good news and some bad news. Well, let me just say it is very common, this, for someone on the defense side to start off relatively low. So, but I want you to understand that I think what they're trying to do with this number is signal that a certain range that they're going to be in. Let me just come out with it, right? What they've offered is $60,000.
What? This is not worth my time. I am asking for millions of dollars and they are talking $60,000. What kind of offer is that?
I think that offer is what I would call a start.
I would call it an insult, and I'm feeling insulted by it.
Well,
this is not what we expected.
No.
I think that is bad faith. I do not understand.
In view of what you saw this relationship as being, and perhaps hopes coming into today, I understand how that could be a disappointment or viewed as an insult. And I understand how it could make you feel, we're never going to get there.
It seems we are wasting our time.
Well, I don't want to waste our time. Let me just say it depends on what strategy you're using. If this offer is intended to say I'm at 60 and I'm only going to 75, then it's maybe not a great offer. If it's just intended as a start and a bit of a response to 1.6 million, then it's a strategy. It's a strategic offer. I may or might not like that strategy, but I understand that strategy.
I do not find it helpful because I fly so far, so many hours I spend to come here to spend this time, and so much money we are talking, and they're saying $60,000.
It seems low.
It doesn't seem low. It is low.
It is low. Then what? Well, can I ask a question? What would you have anticipated they would start with?
Well, I would have thought at least several $100,000 would be a much more realistic assessment from their perspective. I do understand that this is a strategic situation, but I share my client's outrage.
Let me make a suggestion. Remember I said at the beginning that failure in this process is if a settlement would have been possible, if there was some omniscient something in the room that knew that, and we missed it. Remember that? So what I'd like to be able to do is to see, I think what we want to be able to see is, even if we're not happy, if it makes you feel angry that this is what they did, insulted that this is what they did, why, if there's a settlement is possible, why let that feeling get in the way? So,
but how will we know this?
Well, let's see how they move with the numbers. I think that's how we'll know it. That would be my suggestion. You wouldn't want to come, fly all the way here, get an offer, say I'm insulted, leave, and find out later that actually they would have come up to a range that would have been okay. Wouldn't that be a shame?
We're here now. We'll go forward for today.
If we can put aside for just a moment the legal issues, I'd like to understand the non-legal aspect of this, because part of what they offered, even as they were, I know, terminating the contract, was an unexclusive arrangement, and I know why that is very suboptimal from your perspective. At the same time, I'm wondering what Mumbai could do with an unexclusive, whether it has any value at all. So I'm wondering, how many probes are you selling now? Now you don't have that, but you are supplying replacement probes, it sounds like.
Non-exclusive have any value to us or to them?
Well, I suspect it has some value, or I could argue that it has some value to them, but maybe it also has some value to you, although not the kind of value that an exclusive relationship had. But I'm wondering, right now you have neither one, really, because you're, I gather, getting probes from third-party sources and then supplying them?
Yeah, we are getting probes still. I mean, that's a different issue. There's not quite the quality that we used to get. But you're asking me about replacements now, like not under the agreement, how much now?
Sounds like you're basically using what I might call generic suppliers.
Right. I mean, we're probably doing about 600, I'd say.
Okay.
600 over the past year.
And what is the margin on those, roughly? What would you expect to make per probe sale?
Well, if we get the most favored nation, then I think we could make about $150 on each sale.
Okay. So if you're talking anything like $1,500 a year at 150 gross margin, that's a profit of, even assuming some distribution costs, of over $200,000 a year.
Yeah.
Which is not insignificant. I know it isn't what you hoped for, but still. On oximeters, have competitors started selling actually MedPro oximeters in your part of India?
Well, actually not much. I mean, we shut down one company, the Bangalore Hospital Supply Company. So that, actually they're not selling. There's a couple, maybe two other small companies they're selling, but they're not, the product is a little bit less sophisticated than what we're able to sell from MedPro. So actually the competition has not been quite as bad as we had feared.
If we were able to rearrange a guaranteed source of supply of MedPro oximeters, again at favorable prices, that would have to be negotiated and guaranteed in a contract, a year out, what would you think your volume might be on oximeter sales?
Well, I mean, it won't be anything like it was because we had the exclusive agreement, but I suppose it could be as much as 50 or 60%.
So, you just multiply that out, you're looking at a slightly over $100,000 a year in gross profit on the oximeter sales, plus over $200 on the probes, as you've estimated. Again, assuming a guaranteed source and the right pricing, that's over $300,000 a year from even a non-exclusive. I know it's not what you were looking for and not what you had under the old contract, but that's a pretty significant amount of money per year.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But I mean, while that's true, I think in order for me to think about these things, I need to know what is MedPro's plan
Yeah.
What are they going to do in the future? And I think, as you and Chris were discussing, I think, we need to be very clear about under what terms can the agreement be terminated, because I don't want this to happen again.
I've got to make MedPro understand that this would be a profitable and sensible thing for them to do as well, to be able to have Mumbai partners representing them again in southern India.
Dwight, this is all a very nice proposal, and there's some value to us in having a non-exclusive arrangement, but you have to remember we started with an exclusive arrangement. So in order for this to make any sense for us, we're losing something there. We have to gain something on the money side. We have to be accurately compensated for the losses, and there are valid legal claims here which can be shown and demonstrated which represent those losses.
Yes, I've heard that very clearly, and I understand there are essentially two sides to this case. And for you, the most important one at this point, given what's happened to the relationship, is the monetary claims. I'm trying to understand the other part simply because it may become the gap filler that, once we really address the monetary side, sort of puts the whole thing together. But I understand it's only one part of the puzzle, not the puzzle itself.
What I thought I would do is look at the litigation piece with you, because I've been talking with them in the other room about that a lot as well, and so I'd like to talk about it with you and see.